Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori Ki Jai. Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani Ki Jai. Gonitai Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're continuing with Canto 10, chapters 63, and text 6 is the text for today. Panarte Bhagavan Rudra Sasuta Pramata Vrinta Anuya Nandi Virshabham Yuyute Ama Krishnaya Panarte Bhagavan Rudra Sasuta Pramartai Vrinta Anuya Nandi Virshabham Yuyude Rama Krishnayo Banarte Bhagavan Rudra Sasuta Pramatai Vrinta Anuya Nandi Virshabham Yuyude Ama Krishnayo. Please chant. Banarte Bhagavan Rudra Sasuta Pramatai Vrita Aruya Nandi Vrishabham Ayuyute Rama Krishnayor Banarte Bhagavan Rudra Sasuta Pramatai Vrinta Aruya Nandi Vrishabham Yuyute Rama Krishnayo Banate Bhagavan Rudra Sasuta Pramatai Vrita Aruya Nandi Vrishabham Yuyute Rama Krishnayor. And the word for word. Bana arte, for Bana's sake. Bhagavan Rudraha, Lord Shiva. Sasutaha, together with his son. Kartikeya, the general of the demigods. Pramartar, by the Pramartas, mystic sages who always attend Lord Shiva. Appearing in a multitude of forms. Vrinta, accompanied. Aruya, riding. Nandi, on Nandi. Vrishabham, his bull. Yayadhe, he fought. Sorry, you did, sorry. Rama Krishnayo, with Balaram and Krishna. And the translation for text 6 is as follows. Lord Rudra, accompanied by his son Kartikeya and the Pramartas, came riding on Nandi, his bull carrier, to fight Balaram and Krishna on Bana's behalf. Purport. Srila Sridhar Swami states that the word Bhagavan is used here to indicate that Lord Shiva is by nature all-knowing and thus well aware of Lord Krishna's greatness. Still, although Shiva knew Lord Krishna would defeat him, he joined the battle against him to demonstrate the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Omagyanatimarandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshurinmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swamrupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadanti Kam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamlam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupa Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapsa Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavan Vishvarim Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Panchakalpa Taribhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Ramapada Swami Iti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Oh gosh, yes, I forgot about the other page. Thank you very much for reminding me. Sorry. I'm so used to the 1-2 line purports in this text in Canto 10. So continuing with the BBT purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur states that Lord Shiva entered the battle for 2 reasons. First, to increase Lord Krishna's pleasure and enthusiasm, and second, to demonstrate that the Lord's incarnation as Krishna, although enacting human-like pastimes, is superior to other avatars such as Lord Ramachandra. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti further states in this regard that Yoga Maya, Lord Krishna's internal potency, bewildered Lord Shiva, just as she had bewildered Brahma. In support of this statement, the Acharyas cite the phrase Brahma Rudra Mahanam from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Of course, Yoga Maya's job is to make a fine arrangement for the Lord's pastimes, and thus Shiva became enthusiastic to battle the Supreme Lord Krishna. So, indeed, this particular purport or commentary by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is giving the reason why Lord Shiva, fighting on behalf of Banasura, is proceeding in the manner that he's proceeding. And the reason is just to show Banasura his faults by making him experience suffering. So interesting. And earlier one hears Lord Shiva addressing Banasura. such that he makes clear what are Banasura's faults. He tells him directly. So he tells him, this is Lord Shiva addressing Banasura earlier on. He tells him, your flag will be broken, fool, when you have done battle with one who is my equal. That fight will vanquish your conceit. So directly telling him he's conceited. So that was in the previous chapter, the 8th text. So the conceit that Lord Shiva recognized in Banasura had to do with Banasura complaining that the boon he had received from Lord Shiva of those 1,000 arms had become burdensome. Since he could not utilize those arms in a fight, since the only contender that would be his match would be Lord Shiva himself. So it's an interesting thing, showing no gratitude whatsoever. In fact, being outright facetious, to be announcing to Lord Shiva, the boon you've given me of these 1,000 arms are actually burdensome because I can't actually fight with anybody except you. So, hence Lord Shiva's comment to Banasura that he's conceited. So, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti points out that Banasura had implied that Lord Shiva would mercifully fight with him, that he would be freed of his particular sorrow. He saw it as a sorrow that he couldn't fight with anybody, he had no match. So his sorrow was this unfulfilled urge to fight. So if he defeated Lord Shiva, he would become world famous as the conqueror of all directions. So that was actually what Banasura was implying. By telling Lord Shiva, you have to fulfill my desires. I have this urge to fight, and these 1,000 arms are actually burdensome. He's actually implying that if he defeats Lord Shiva, then he'll become world famous as the conqueror of all directions. So you can understand Lord Shiva telling Banasura directly that he's conceited. So now the suffering that Banasura would come to experience and so see his faults, because remember, that's the reason that Lord Shiva is going to engage in this battle on Banasura's side. So he's seen Banasura as conceited, but still he's actually going to engage in battle on Banasura's side. And he mentioned that he actually is going to, understanding is that he's going to do so that Banasura can see his faults. So the suffering that Banasura is going to have to experience would be this is the suffering. And Lord Shiva lets it be known, because he uses these words. He says, this foolish, intoxicated person who has received my mercy thinks his 1,000 arms to be a burden. Then my master, who relieves the world of its burden, will indeed take away his burden. The implication is that Banasura, the suffering Banasura is going to have to experience, is that he's going to lose his arms. And hence, he's going to experience some suffering. Because that was the reason he had this urge to fight and why he wanted to conquer. He had these 1,000 arms. So the suffering he's going to experience is having to lose those arms. Or at least we'll come to hear 996 of them. So Banasura's mentality, because this is the interesting thing, this is the whole problem. He has a certain mentality, and that mentality is of one And there's a very nice description given by Narada Muni when he's talking to King Parchinibari, referring to a certain kind of mentality that persons had. And this applies very much to Banasura. So listen to this interesting description. Having the bodily conception of I am this or I am that. My duty is this, and therefore I shall do it. So, Banasura worshipped Lord Shiva. And in fact, he'd even addressed Lord Shiva. Oh, Lord Mahadev, I bow down to you, the spiritual master and controller of the worlds. You are like the heavenly tree that fulfills the desires of those whose desires are unfulfilled. So this is how Banasura had initially addressed Lord Shiva. But this submissive statement was followed with, besides you, I find no one in the three worlds worthy to fight. So he's implying still, Lord Shiva has to fulfill his desires to fight. So this implies that he was saying, and so when I've defeated you, Lord Shiva, my world conquest will be complete and my desire for battle will be satisfied. That's actually what he's saying. He's implying that. So this was Banasura's bodily concept of himself. He saw himself as a world conqueror. I can conquer the world. I can conquer all directions. In fact, he even tells Lord Shiva that he'd try to attack the guardians of the four corners of the world, but that they had fled in fear of him. So, of course, Banasura has this concept of himself, and this is the mentality that I am a conqueror and no one can defeat me. So that's the mentality he's holding. And going back to how Narada Muni describes this mentality when he's talking to King Prachinibari, these are all mental impressions. And all these activities are temporary, and nonetheless, by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity gets a chance to execute his mental concoctions. Thus, he gets another body. So, the idea is that basically, it's just a mental idea one has of oneself, how one sees oneself. So, this is how Banasura was seeing himself. And actually, how Narada Muni describes it is that each living entity gets a chance to actually carry out their mental idea of themselves, but it's by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because one gets a particular body that allows one to execute that. And if one isn't successful in this life, that mentality travels to the next body and one gets a chance again, arranged by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is what Narada Muni is saying about persons who are very much seeing themselves in relation to their body and the identity they hold of themselves. So there's an explanation that's expanded upon by Srila Prabhupada. He says that if a person is absorbed in this kind of bodily concept, his activities are performed on that platform. So how you see yourself, you'll function externally in the world according to how you see yourself. So Srila Prabhupada makes a generalization. In this world, we see that every nation is trying to become superior to every other nation. And we see that every being is trying to advance beyond his fellow man. So it's a generalization that every single person in this world is trying to advance beyond one's fellow man. So that's Srila Prabhupada generalizing. And in Banasura's case, he was trying to advance beyond his spiritual master. Lord Shiva was his spiritual master, and Banasura was trying to advance beyond Lord Shiva. So Srila Vishwanath points out that Lord Shiva is addressed as Bhagavan. So notice, this was mentioned to indicate that by nature he is all-knowing, and thus he's well aware of Krishna's greatness. Because Lord Shiva is all-knowing, he's aware, fully aware of Krishna's greatness. So there's an explanation that's given, and Srila Prabhupada is writing this, but it's originally drawn from Prahlad Maharaj. When one is completely absorbed in Adokshaja, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which was Lord Shiva's case, who is beyond the sense perception of materialistic persons, one is situated in Brahmananda. So the point that's been made by Srila Prabhupada is that it's impossible to conceive of the Supreme Personality of Godhead because he's on a different platform. He's not on a material platform. He's transcendentally situated, which means he's beyond the concepts that one can hold if one is a materialistic person. You can't comprehend even the Supreme Personality of Godhead if you're a materialistic person. So in fact, because of this inability to conceive of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and this is Srila Prabhupada, many people will think that God is actually dead. And so they are thinking God doesn't exist because of the fact that they can't conceive of him. And in fact, the reason they can't conceive of him is because they're holding these materialistic ideas of their own selves. And they're functioning in a very materialistic way, sort of in relation to the concepts they hold of themselves. It blinds one to the existence of God. So, Srila Prabhupada explains that God actually is eternally existing in his Satchit Ananda Vigraha, his eternal form. He's eternally existing. It's just that materialistic persons are blind to his existence and can't even conceive of such a being that's eternally existing. And constant meditation on the Lord is called samadhi, ecstasy or trance. And Lord Shiva, he's exhibiting these kind of symptoms of having particularly concentrated attention. And he's achieved this qualification of being able to always be meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's actually enjoying Brahma Nirvana or always being in trance. So that's Lord Shiva's position. And this is something explained in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam about Lord Shiva. Now, there's a description by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita of what actions are involved for somebody to be in this kind of perfectional stage on the path of self-realization, because one realizes oneself as the spiritual being in relation to Lord Krishna, the supreme spiritual being. And Lord Shiva, he's in this position where he's constantly able to meditate on the Supreme Lord. So Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, he describes what are those actions that allow one to come to this stage of realizing oneself as a spirit soul. So making that transition from being very materially minded and just actually seeing oneself in a very materialistic way, like just holding a mental concept of oneself, not even anything in relation to a supreme being, understanding oneself as spirit soul. So this is how Lord Krishna describes the actions that are needed to help one to develop the understanding of one's spiritual identity. So this is how he explains it. being purified by his intelligence and controlling the mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification, being freed from attachment and hatred, and living in a secluded place, eating little, controlling the body, mind, and power of speech, being always in trance, being detached and free from false ego, false strength, false pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things, being free from false proprietorship, and peaceful. Such a person is certainly elevated to the position of self-realization. So these are all the actions that are needed to allow one to actually come to a different platform of reality. So move beyond a very material way of functioning to a spiritual way of functioning on a spiritual platform. So there's all these, you notice there's so much emphasis on controlling the mind, not having this ego section, this like false idea of one's identity, and not having this pride that's actually false, because how can one be proud? One's dependent on the Supreme Lord. So that's from Bhagavad Gita 1851, Lord Krishna describing the actions involved that allow one to come to that as platform of self-realization. So this stage of perfection, being on the path of self-realization, it's achieved, and we heard Lord Shiva's in a stage of perfection on the path of self-realization because he's able to constantly meditate on the Supreme Lord. Means that he's free of all of this. He's free of false pride. He's free of the idea that he's got holds all the strength. So having a false idea of himself as strong. So this perfectional stage, it's achieved simply by performing one's duty for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's how Lord Shiva is seeing what he's doing. He's doing everything for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the other criterion that's there for being on this in this stage of perfection is one renounces the results of one's work for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So whatever results from one's work, one doesn't claim it for oneself, but rather one renounces it and sees that result that it's for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these are the two criteria that are very important to allow one to function on that platform of self-realization. And there's a certain effect that results from fulfilling those two criteria to be functioning on this platform of self-realization. One's actually joyful, always joyful, and one sees all living entities equally, and one doesn't ever lament about anything, oh, why did that happen? And one doesn't hanker for something, oh, I must have that. And one's transcendental position is actually beyond the influence of nature, or matter, I should say. So it means one doesn't get affected by, being successful, not being successful, etc. Because, you're thinking, whatever you're doing, the results are going to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So therefore, you're not attached to that result and holding on to it and therefore experiencing distress or happiness. It's already allocated to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Lord Krishna puts it this way: one can understand me in truth, my transcendental names, forms, qualities, and pastimes only by devotional service. So that's devotional service. There's two criteria being there. That one is performing everything for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and one's working for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there's an interesting reason And this is mentioned even in the BBT purport, which is drawing from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that why it is that Lord Shiva joined the battle against Lord Krishna, because this is an interesting point. He's doing everything for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but yet here he is, he's going to fight the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there has to be a reason for that. So, especially because we're understanding that Lord Shiva fully understands understands Krishna's greatness. And he knows that he's going to be defeated by Lord Krishna. He knows this. But he's going to go into battle against Lord Krishna. So there has to be a reason for this. And the reason is that by going into battle with Lord Krishna, Lord Shiva wants, because he knows he's going to be defeated, it's actually going to make Krishna more glorious. And he wants Krishna's glory to be visible. So it's very extraordinary. So, and the reasons given by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur for Lord Shiva going into battle is that he wanted to increase Lord Krishna's pleasure. So remember, functioning on the transcendental plane, one is working for Lord Krishna's pleasure. But by going into battle with Lord Krishna, Lord Shiva saw it that he was going to increase Lord Krishna's pleasure. Because Lord Krishna likes to fight. So, and he was also going to increase Lord Krishna's enthusiasm, because it's not that exciting for Lord Krishna to fight Banasura. But it could be very exciting for Lord Krishna to have a battle with Lord Shiva. So he's going to increase Lord Krishna's enthusiasm to fight. And secondly, Lord Shiva wanted to demonstrate that Lord Krishna is superior to other avatars, such as Lord Rama. So, in terms of this particular point, there's always mentioned that one surrenders everything to the lotus feet of the Lord. And particularly in devotional service. And the lotus feet of the Lord, it's part of Krishna's greatness that he is, what would be the word, in a sense, very humbly and happily accepting whatever one is performing in relation to him, whatever one's actions are in relation to him. And part of this greatness is explained by Queen Suniti to her son Dhruva. So I'm going to quote what she says to her son, because it gives some idea of this greatness of Lord Krishna. My dear boy, you should take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is very kind to his devotees. Persons seeking liberation from the cycle of birth and death always take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord in devotional service. Becoming purified by executing your allotted occupational duty, just situate yourself, just situate the Supreme Personality of Godhead in your heart, and without deviating for a moment, engage always in his service. So this is some advice that Queen Suniti gave to her little son Dhruva. And I think it's very much paints a picture in a very concise way of why it is that one would want to take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and it paints a picture of the greatness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead because of his great kindness to absolutely everyone. And that's the reason, such kindness. And so her advice is that one just carries the Supreme Personality of Godhead in one's heart. And at the same time engages in some service for him. So whatever one's duty is, one is performing that. So one's seeing that as service for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, carrying the Supreme Personality of Godhead in one's heart. And that's from the 4th canto, the 8th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam. And Srila Prabhupada says, as soon as one places the Supreme Personality of Godhead within one's heart, everything becomes very easy and successful. So this is the extraordinary thing that results from performing that action of putting the Supreme Personality of Godhead within one's heart and performing one's work as an activity in relation to the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a service to Him. Everything becomes very easy and successful. So that's Srila Prabhupada saying what the result actually is. So the other results of materialistic person is the idea that you're going to get the results and then you're going to wallow in your success. But it's so short-lived and it's not necessarily easy, whatever you're doing to get your particular result. But if you're carrying the Supreme Personality of Godhead in your heart and you're performing your work as a service to Him, everything's going to be successful and it's going to be easy. So, Lord Shiva's greatness now, because that was mentioned, that he has this greatness. It lies in discharging his duties. And Krishna, sorry. If one were to die before coming to this higher platform of being able to function on a spiritual plane where one is carrying the Supreme Personality of Godhead in one's heart and is performing all one's activities in service to Him, say one is actually suddenly going to die while one is performing one's prescribed duties. This would also be considered auspicious because it's more auspicious to do that than to follow somebody else's path, even if that other person's path seems to be less dangerous. So very interesting. So this is all in connection to why Lord Shiva is choosing the particular path he's choosing, which is, going on the side of Banasura, whom he considers a fool and he considers a conceited person. He's still performing his duties by actually doing that because Banasura is his devotee. So Banasura is doing things to serve Lord Shiva. And Lord Shiva is protecting him and by allowing him to get defeated by Lord Krishna. This is very interesting because the protection it's by being defeated by Lord Krishna, Banasura is going to lose his conceit. And this is actually burdensome. When one's carrying these concepts of oneself, one can be so prideful, so conceited, so arrogant. So it's actually such kindness on the part of Lord Krishna to allow one to drop that arrogance and that conceit. So Lord Shiva is performing his particular duty to help his devotee. So there's an interesting point. If, for instance, somebody is on this platform of pure devotional service, which is Lord Shiva, there actually wouldn't be any harm if he gave up his prescribed duties. Because he's on such an elevated platform. So if he were just performing his constitutional duties that he's, serving Lord Krishna by serving him in his heart, that would be equally good. This is given in a purport in Bhagavad Gita 3:35. But and the reason this is so that his material duties, you could say, would become irrelevant. So, I'm calling it material duties serving Banasura in one sense, even though he's a spiritual master. But by making this arrangement, Lord Shiva didn't have to do that, but he chose to because he's just on such a elevated platform and so devoted to Lord Krishna that his magnanimity extends in this way that he can even apply himself in, you could say, in a kind of material way to fight on behalf of somebody he considers a fool and a conceited person. So there's Lord Shiva executing his duty to serve Lord Krishna. And at the same time, Lord Krishna is going to make the faith steady of somebody who's serving Lord Shiva, such as Banasura. So it's a very interesting dynamic that's present there. So actually, Lord Krishna will be helping Banasura to increase his faith in Lord Shiva. And Lord Krishna describes the effect for somebody like Banasura. And this is Lord Krishna's words. And this is from Bhagavad Gita 7:22. After worshipping that demigod with faith, a person obtains from him favors that are bestowed by me alone. So notice, Lord Shiva understands that Banasura is actually going to receive, you could say, a kindness from Lord Krishna, that his conceit is going to be destroyed. And Lord Krishna himself is explaining that Banasura is going to benefit because by the favor that was arranged by Lord Shiva, the favor that Lord Shiva gave to him was to arrange for this battle with Lord Krishna. Banasura's faith in Lord Shiva will be strengthened. But Lord Krishna says it's actually that it's by his kindness that everything will happen, and that's true. So that was that particular text from Bhagavad Gita, that a person who's worshipping a demigod, they actually, the favors they get from the demigod are actually being bestowed by Lord Krishna. And Lord Shiva understands this because he says, my master is going to actually remove the burden from this conceited fool, Banasura. So Lord Shiva, on his part, is fixing his mind on the form of Lord Krishna as Paramatma with the help of his good intelligence, and he's offering the result of his actions to Lord Krishna. And Krishna gives the result. This is how Krishna explains the result. By this he will attain my shelter. And that's Bhagavad Gita 18:57. In all activities, just depend upon me and work always under my protection. In such devotional service, be fully conscious of me. So that's precisely the position of Lord Shiva. He does have Lord Krishna's shelter, even though he's going to be defeated. He's got Lord Krishna's shelter. And Lord Shiva understands he's going to be defeated, but he's doing it for the purpose of Krishna's pleasure. So it doesn't change his focus. And so Lord Shiva will act not as master of the world, but under the direction of the Supreme Lord. So Lord Shiva is seeing that he's actually executing something through this arrangement that actually is coming from Lord Krishna's desire. So he's merely going to discharge his duty under the direction of the Lord, unaffected by whether he's successful or not successful. You know, is he going to win in the battle or lose in the battle? He's not concerned, Lord Shiva. He's just concerned to be acting, performing his duty under the direction of the Supreme Lord. So quite different from Banasura, who's on the material platform thinking he's master of the world and he's going to conquer the world. And in fact, there's earlier on the ridiculous part where Lord Shiva tells him his flag's going to be broken, his conceit is going to be destroyed, and Banasura goes off very happily, looking forward to the day when he's going to be engaging in battle. So these were some thoughts on this. I hope it was clear. It's a little complex, the dynamic. But if there's some thought on the subject matter or some question to further the discussion, please feel free.
One thought is that Lord Shiva had the capacity to punish this fellow. I mean, he could have executed the punishment, the cut of the 996 arms himself. Lord Shiva have that power and that capacity, but he chose not to. And one of the things that is mentioned is that uh, that choice of Lord Shiva shows that Lord Krishna is greater than all the other avatars. And comes to mind that Ravana was also a great devotee of Lord Shiva, and he received boons from Lord Shiva. And when Ravana was being, in battle with Lord Ramachandra, Lord Shiva didn't interfere. And similar with other demons, um, but in this case, he did fight on behalf of the demon, and so not necessarily because he didn't have the capacity to handle this demon, but as you mentioned, as you highlighted, because he wanted to glorify, he was part of Krishna's pastime, and he was very much in sync with Krishna's desire and also his own desire to glorify Krishna. So it's quite interesting.
Thank you very much for pointing out that, contrasting it with Lord Shiva's choice with Ravana, who was also his devotee, and in that circumstance not choosing to interfere. Yes, there's another point that just adding, Lord Shiva actually had taken on a particular duty for Banasura, and that was to protect Banasura city. So that, in some sense, was part of his duty that he'd agreed to protect Banasura city. So when all of the entourage of Krishna arrived and started destroying the gardens and the ramparts and the watchtower, actually, Lord Shiva, as part of his duty, discharging his duty, took that, again, discharging his duty. Okay, he has to protect the city for Banasura. But one knows where his mentality is. And that's the extraordinary, subtle component that one has to think about more deeply, how Lord Shiva is making his decisions and what his motivations are and what his mentality is. So it's very extraordinary. And there's, when one looks at Lord Brahma instructing the persons after the Daksha incident of how they needed to go and approach Lord Shiva, one of the statements Lord Brahma makes is, how could anybody commit an offense against Lord Shiva, because he's such an extraordinary personality. And I think this particular pastime, if you think about it very deeply, the dynamic that's there, you have to think what an extraordinary personality Lord Shiva is. I mean, completely extraordinary. That he has the right motivation for going into battle. He's protecting the person he considers the fool and the conceited person. He's executing his duty of protecting the city, but he's delighted because he knows that actually by his fighting, it's actually going to give pleasure to Lord Krishna. So He's able to synchronize everything in such an extraordinary way. Yeah.
One sense is very similar to grandfather Bhishma, who had to fight on the side of Duryodhan. And he was at one point faced against Arjuna and Krishna. And the whole scene of him throwing arrows at Krishna and piercing him. So it was on the side of grandfather Bhishma. It's like throwing Pushpanjali to Krishna, where he was throwing arrows, you know.
And Krishna was happily
And
receiving
Krishna
it,
was
knowing the
receiving it.
mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is quite wonderful. So I guess that's a statement of Srila Prabhupada that when one's performing one's duties and doing it as service to Lord Krishna, so even if it's actually piercing the body of Lord Krishna with arrows, it's actually a successful endeavor. And the success is the great enhanced happiness that's there between the devotee and Lord Krishna. So that's what makes it successful. Even if the duty appears externally as questionable, actually attacking one's master, because that's what's happening in both cases. Um, but it's a successful execution of duty because it's enhancing the devotional mood and the connection with Lord Krishna, and bringing perfection because that duty is being performed as a service to Lord Krishna. So, so Lord Shiva is executing his duty of fighting Lord Krishna in order to enhance Krishna's pleasure. Yeah. And at the same time, he's doing that duty of protecting the city of Banasura, which he'd agreed to do.
Thank you for your class, Mataji. Try to word the question. Say within ISKCON, the highest purpose that we have is to, above pleasing Krishna, is to please Prabhupada in his agenda of book distribution and spreading the holy name through the book distribution and the different activities that Prabhupada has given us, is my thought. So, does it boil down to basically doing our work to please Srila Prabhupada?
Well, the spiritual master is the external representation of Krishna. And the panacea for the suffering in this age of Kali Yuga is chanting the holy name of Krishna. So the way to allow that to be understood is through literature that supports why that should be done or could be done, and why it will actually alleviate suffering. So if you're actually receiving the order to distribute books by the spiritual master, then that is actually bringing education to people of why it is that one can perform one's duty for Krishna. You need education to understand that, because generally everybody's caught up in their own mental concept of themselves. So to expand that requires education. So, yes, so you still are serving Krishna by serving the order of the spiritual master. It's none different. It's the external representation of Krishna, and Krishna is characterized by his great kindness. So the kindness is to actually bring relief to people suffering at the present time. And this is a particularly horrible age.
And when Krishna speaks of it is better to perform one's own work imperfectly rather than perform another's work perfectly. When he speaks of that, is that speaking of the ashrams like the Brahminical, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Vaishyas,
I
and the
didn't
Sudra?
understand what was the first part that you said.
Well, when Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, it's better to perform one's own work
Um,
rather than another, even if it's imperfectly performed, better than perform another person's work perfectly. That particular verse, is that when he speaks of a person's work, is that speaking of the ashram, the like brahmacharis, or let's say the Brahminical, then the Kshatriya, then the Vaishya, and the Sudra? Is that what he means by work? Other works,
yeah,
person's
it
work.
could be that. It could be the. It's just basically that the focus is on one's own occupational duties. Occupation refers to the particular social division or spiritual division that one falls into. So, yes, it could be not doing the duties of somebody of a different occupation or a different spiritual division. You have to think of the duties in relation to yourself and your division, spiritual division and social division. Yes, yes. So thank you very much for your very kind attention. I hope it was somewhat clear, the class. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.